It can be really hard to find a good deal on PC parts these days, particularly graphics cards are quite expensive, but I managed to pick up this, the RTX 4080 Palit Jetstream edition. Got this at a really good price, £1,050, which is quite a bit below the RRP. How does this compare to something like the ASUS TUF, which is a more recognised brand, if you like? We're going to find out in today's video. We're going to be putting together a beautiful black glass cannon build in the Corsair 4000X case. We're going to be putting this in there, we're going to be testing the temperatures, testing the performance, and thankfully I've done a build with a 4080 TUF by ASUS before, so we can consider the temperature differences, and luckily that was also in the Corsair 4000X, so it's going to make for a nice comparison. Hopefully you'll stick with us. There'll be plenty of fun, frivolity, and jokes involving your mother, so see you there. Platform starts with the motherboard. I've used the NZXT N5 Z690, which is going for a decent price of about £100 right now, and that includes Wi-Fi. The board looks great, has plenty of features, and all the power delivery that I need for this build. The downsides, the RGB software is NZXT CAM, which I don't like, and setting custom fan curves in the BIOS is a major faff. They don't have a graphical interface, so you have to type in the numbers manually to get the fan speeds right. Come on guys, that's not on a modern motherboard. FYI, it is a Z690, so we'll need a BIOS update prior to use, but we're going to do that later on. Next thing I do is pop the SSD in. I've chosen the Kingston KC3000. This drive is a bit of a hidden gem. It's just as good as the Samsung 980 Pro or the WD SN850, but it comes in a bit cheaper because it doesn't have that brand luster. 7,000 megabytes per second read and write, DRAM cache, and a solid endurance rating of 800 terabytes written. It just goes into the top M2 slot here because it's a top drive. For DRAM, we're keeping it at DDR4 for the cost savings. As this will be a Corsair build, it's Corsair Vengeance RGB RS. 2 lots of 16GB making 32GB total at 3600 MHz speed, CL18. Ideal for gamers. Click them in place and you're away. Next up, CPU. Intel i5-13600KF, 6 performance cores for games, 8 efficient cores for multitasking. Pretty nice gaming chip, this. 6 cores is about the sweet spot for gaming CPUs nowadays, in my opinion. Sometimes with more cores you get a slightly faster speed, but you're often getting diminishing returns past this point. We need to cool that CPU chip, so we've gone for a 240mm Corsair H100X RGB. That will keep the RGB all Corsair, satisfying that itch to have everything match. RGB pump head, 2 RGB fans, enough said really. I like to install the pump head on the board first rather than mount the radiator in the case first. I find this is way easier, and I'm a bit puzzled why more people don't do it this way. But hey, I'm just a bit of a freak. We need a high quality power supply to run this system, and that's why I've plumped for the EVGA Supernova G6 850W gold rated unit. Pretty much any name brand gold rated 850W unit would be fine, but I really do like these Supernovas, very reliable. I especially like that it comes with PCIe power cables without daisy chaining, keeps the cable bulk down whilst allowing for the most efficient operation. A top tip for your power supply is to run the CPU power cables through the top right slot of the case before putting your motherboard in. Saves you a bit of time later. If your motherboard has an 8-pin socket and a 4-pin socket, you can peel away the 2 portions of the CPU power cable. Just make sure on the one that you've halved that the piece with the 2 square plugs is what you plug into your motherboard. Don't put the incorrect half of it in because you might get a bit smoky. Time to mount the motherboard into our Corsair 4000X case, and that's fairly easy. Just line up the motherboard holes with the standoffs and screw down. Make sure there aren't any cables trapped underneath the board first. Then we can just hook up all the connections such as USB ports, audio, fans, etc. And then we can mount our liquid cooler in the roof of the case. Here's our Palit RTX 4080. Looks pretty inconspicuous. Line it up with the PCIe slot and click it in. You want to hear a decent click. We'll be using this FazGear adapter, which converts 3 8-pin PCIe plugs into a single 12-pin cable. It looks a lot cleaner than using the standard adapter that you get in the box. The 4000X has a nice cable management design, so it only takes a couple of minutes to tidy up the back and chuck the panels back on. So, we're nearly done, but we need to update the BIOS. I have a USB stick here with the preloaded BIOS on it.
There's some instructions on the NZXT website on how to do this if you want to know how to do it, but you insert it into the BIOS port here. We hold down the flashback button until it flashes at you and just let it do its thing. It takes about 10 minutes. So it's built now. Let's reveal the build as well as the gaming tests in a teeny weeny montage. Let's have it. That's it. I've had quite enough of your palette bashing at YouTube. I've used palette cards loads of times and never had any problems. And now with these test results, we can see that the Palit Jetstream is just as good as the TUF in terms of temperatures. Those 4 degrees will make no difference to anything, especially as it's all below 70 anyway. The TUF has 30 MHz more clock speed, but that's a sausage in a hallway really when you think about it, if you know what I mean. No impact whatsoever. By comparison, the gaming performance is pretty much identical. Sure, ASUS is considered a premium brand, or at least it was up until the recent events of course, but is it worth 20% more cost just for that? I'd say no, but I'm not your mother, I know her well. I suppose the palette card doesn't have any RGB and it is a very bog standard design, so that's something to consider, though I imagine it might actually be a bonus for some buyers that don't want an overly flashy system. A lot of the guys that have been in the hardware space for a while, the more cynical guys if you like, talking about your not an Apple fans, your frame chasers, etc., they often advocate for this law of the cheapest model, and I can see why. Yes, I concede there are a few rare cases where the cheapest model is a bit crap. I'm thinking about a little Zotac Twin Edge, for example. But on the whole, the rule is a sensible one. Spend your money on performance, not hype. With the £200 you save going for the Palit instead of the TUF, you get some sweet gear for your setup. The rule is basically get the cheapest GPU model that's not a Zotac. That aside, what about this build then? Leave your comments below. I think it's a classy design. The vintage Corsair RGB look, nice glass panelled case, temperatures are decent-ish, though it would probably be better in the airflow variant of this case. I think it's a gorgeous RGB build that doesn't go over the top, and I'd say the 13600KF is a perfect partner for the 4080. Just the right number of cores, just the right amount of speed. Simply marvellous. This system will crush any game you throw at it at 1440p and 4K. The 4090, which would be the next graphics card up from the 4080, I think it's silly money, especially when you get the majority of the benefits on the 4080. Anyone that says they need the 4090 better have a damn good reason or a damn fat bank account. That's what I say. Now, this is my first time using the H100X RGB cooler by Corsair. I was a bit surprised when I unboxed it because it no longer comes with an RGB controller that connects to a USB 2 header. Instead it has a splitter that converts all the RGB elements into a single 3-pin 5V ARGB. Now that's great if you have other brands of RGB stuff in your PC because you can use the motherboard software to control all of it at the same time. However, in my view, the best bit of having Corsair RGB is actually AEKI. Yes, it could be a resource hog, but it's probably the most robust RGB software out there with great customization. With this new direction, i.e. not including a hub, this selling point is lost. I suppose this is either an advantage or a disadvantage based on your viewpoint. I'm not a fan, at least for this build. Corsair 4000X case comes with an RGB hub with 6 slots, but with the 4 case fans on the case, the 2 cooler fans on the liquid cooler, and the pump head RGB, that's 7 RGB cables, so you don't have enough. The 4000X's hub has 6 slots, meaning that all the fans are controlled in IQ, but the pump head had to be controlled via the motherboard's RGB software, which is a little bit annoying, but a minor point in the grand scheme of things. We've shared some laughs, we've shared some tears. And after all that, what have we learned? We've learned that branding is just that, branding. There's cheaper models of graphics cards out there that are going to do just as good a job as the posh ones. The only things you really sacrifice are the looks, or in some cases the extended warranties. So those are things to think about when buying a graphics card yourself. But for me, I think buying the cheaper models actually makes sense because you can spend that additional saved money on something else in your setup that's going to make a bigger difference. But what do you think? Leave your comments below. I want to hear what you think about the build. I want to hear what you think about buying cheaper models of graphics cards. And also, I want to hear about what you think about this new style of video layout where I talk through the build as I'm doing it. That'd be much appreciated. Put your comments below, and I'll see you in the next video. I've been Concept Soup, and it's time to get out there in that beautiful sun. See you later.